So last night I was at the gym doing my thing. I got to the squat rack and I was doing my usual 6 sets of 5. When this fella came over and said to me, "I wish my squats looked like yours." Immediately I kind of giggled to myself. I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Your squat is so upright and you go so deep." I said to him, "This is the normal way of squatting. Like, this is how you should be squatting." And he said to me, "There's no way I could get that upright and that deep." And so we, went back and forth, back and forth. I said to him, "What does your squat look like?" At the time, he was in the leg press machine and he was doing his thing, and I realized that most of his workout was spent, in fact, all of his workout was spent in the whole machine world. He was doing the leg press, I was doing the leg curl, leg extension, all that. I thought that was really, really interesting. And but anyway, he was asking me how come I was so upright in my squat. And he said to me that he leans over heaps when he squats. It almost looks like a deadlift, like a good morning squat. I said to him, "Look, man, I'm not a natural at this. I've spent quite a few years trying to work out what works and what doesn't for the squatting." And so I went on to explain to him that it's all about mobility, it's all about flexibility, and he kind of didn't believe me at first. He said, "No, it's about the leverage, it's about the hip impingement, blah blah blah." He threw a couple of those words out, and I said to him, "Listen, man, have you ever been able to do the splits?" He said, "No." I said, "Middle splits, front splits?" He said, "No, definitely not." I said, "Can you touch your toes with straight legs?" He said, "No." And so I said to him, "Look, man, I know it's very much possible that you have crappy, hip structure and your leverage is all wrong. But I think it would be a logical idea to actually remove the flexibility and mobility out of the picture before you start saying, 'I don't have the DNA or the genes or the leverages.'" I said to him, "Look, stretch as much as you can. Get to your front splits and middle splits. I know it's a huge goal, but that's what I would do before just saying, 'Oh, I'm not built for this.'" He kind of looked at me weird and he said to me, "Nah, I don't think that's gonna work." And I said, "Look, give it a go. Like, don't just be a quitter. I'm definitely not a natural. I've spent quite a few years stretching and trying to stretch this, trying to stretch that. I've kind of worked out what works for me." And so I thought it was interesting that somebody that was impressed with my squat, which is not world class by any stretch of the imagination, he was impressed with me. And here I was giving somebody like that some advice. So how do you stay upright in a squat? What muscles do you stretch? Now, generally, if you just work on your hip flexibility, range of motion, just the whole body stretching, you'll find that you'll be able to get lower and lower in the squat. Now, there is a small percentage of us out there who just don't have the hip structure for it, for whatever reason. Their femurs are 50 meters long and they just can't get deep into the squat. And so for those type of people, you can argue that Olympic weightlifting shoes with the elevated heel will help you. But for the most part, I think a lot of people can get to the whole third world squat, the whole, flat feet, no shoes, bare feet, Asian or third world squat. I think a lot of us can do that. It's just we can't because we don't have the mobility, the flexibility for it. Our musculature is so tight because we sit on chairs, we sit on toilets, we never really get into that range of motion. So I've spent a number of years trying to work out exactly what works. I've rolled my calves, I've stretched my ankles, I've stretched the tibialis anterior, I've worked on my quad, I've worked on my hamstring, worked on the glutes, worked on the piriformis. I've done everything, and in each of those little goals that I had, I thought I'll just smash this muscle and see if this is going to work. Well, I've kind of worked out over the last couple of years that, mobility in general around the hip area is going to help you. But the most important for me that I've worked out so far is posterior chain flexibility. What do I mean by that? Well, it's essentially a hamstring stretch where you go, reach for your toes on the ground. But it's not just the hamstring. You see, we're not just compartments put together. We are whole. What I mean by that is that you can't think of one system in its isolation. So when you stretch your hamstring, it might feel tight, but that tightness might be spilling over from something else, right? So when you stretch, I wouldn't recommend just stretching one muscle. You would stretch a whole plane or whole chain. So when you do the hamstring stretch, when you're leaning over and reaching for your toes, you're actually stretching the whole fascia behind your leg. So your fascia that extends all the way from your heel, essentially, or from your foot, all the way up to your neck, essentially. So this is why when you roll your foot, on a lacrosse ball or a tennis ball and you retest your squatting, you might get a little lower. That's because you're relieving the tension in the fascia, which is spilling over and adding against, I guess, length to other parts of that posterior chain. So that's what's worked for me. You got to stretch your hamstrings. You got to stretch your whole posterior chain. You got to become more supple. Until you can do middle splits and front splits, and you still can't squat after developing such an extreme level of flexibility, then you can say, look, I'm not built for this. But until then, I don't think you should be, just saying, oh, I'm not built for that, and just walking away from the thing. A lot of people can squat. In fact, if you look at this guy here, I'll just pull him up on the screen right now. This guy is not an athlete by any means. Looks like he's from a third world somewhere. And he's squatting like a beast. Like, look at him. His knees are not over his toes. He has incredible hip flexion. His back is pretty much straight. His lumbar is straight. There's no rounding. If you put a bar on his back, that would look like an ass to grass squat, like incredible. And so that's the other thing that I want to give you my opinion on, and that's the whole myth that you can't squat because you have poor ankle mobility. I've done that. I've stretched my ankles. I have done all the banded distractions, the voodoo, flossing, all that sort of shit. Never worked for me. That's because you can't just work on one joint. Your whole posterior chain is tight, and if your hamstring is tight, it's going to pull on the calf through the fascia, and that's going to be tight. Then your plantar fascia is also going to get tight. The whole thing gets tight, right? So work on systems rather than individual, muscles. As you can see in this guy, it's got nothing to do with ankle mobility. His knees are not ahead of his toes, which means squatting is all a hip thing. You need to improve your hip flexion. Now, when you think about this maneuver, the squat that is, your hips need to be flexible. Now, I can see a number of structures here that need to be really, really long. One is the hamstring. I know it doesn't seem that way, but trust me, in my experience, stretching the hamstring did a lot for me. And the other thing, which you can't see in this picture, it's the adductors. Now, the adductors originate in the hip and insert into the distal portion of the femur. And you can imagine when that's tight, it's going to cause a posterior pelvic tilt. It's going to tuck or do the butt wink thing. So address the adductors, address the hamstrings. And that's why I always say to people, the extremes of those stretches are the middle splits for the adductors, and then the front splits, right? That's what I'm striving to do. I'm striving to do the splits. I know I'll probably never get there, but as I've continued on my journey to get to those two things, I've improved my upright posture in the squat purely because of mobility. I'm not doing anything other than stretching. You can do strengthening exercise, this and that, but like I said to you before on this video, nothing's worked as good as stretching. Now, there is another fella that I have always kind of idolized in terms of weightlifting, and I've known about his flexibility as well. He's essentially a gold medalist. His name is Dmitriy Klokov. He's a Russian weightlifter. He's retired now. I think he's in his 40s now, if not late 30s. But anyway, he's got a incredible strength level. Obviously, he's a Olympian. His father was also an Olympian, so it's in the family. But have a look at this squat. This squat is absolutely incredible. This man is phenomenal, really. Just check him out, right? Look what he does. Look how beautiful this squat is. It also does a pause at the bottom, and just look at the angle of his back. Look at how he's just comfortable in that bottom position. That's because his musculature is allowing him to be comfortable in the hole, and then he gets out from the hole using the right muscles that he was supposed to be using, and there's no leaning forward like a maniac. That's a proper squat to me. When you can go to basically rest your hamstrings onto your calves, take a couple of deep breaths, be comfortable in it, and then explode through the movement using the right musculature. Now, how did he get there? Does he have just freakish good leverages? Just so you know, this guy is not 5 foot nothing. This guy's probably my height, like 180 odd centimeters. But look I'll show another video where he's stretching. Now, this guy is no joke, and he got his flexibility through working through it. So he does this quad stretch here, right? I can't do this. Can you do this? Right. So before you start calling your, oh, I don't have the DNA for it, I don't have the leverages, get to this level of flexibility and then talk to me, and then say to me you can't do it. You might not be able to do it, but I think the majority of people will be able to do it. So this is the first stretch that's really impressing me. He does this, adductor stretch here as well. I'll show you another quick one. So he does this back twist thing as well, which is freaking incredible. Like, look how supple he is and strong, right? So how many of us are tight and weak? This guy is flexible and strong. See the relationship here? I have heard one person say to me before, I actually heard it on YouTube somewhere, can't remember what source it was, but they said that tight muscles are weak muscles. Think about that for a moment. A tight muscle is a weak muscle. So a tight muscle has gone into a spasm essentially, and it's freaking out that it's going to tear off the bone. So it goes into a spasm to protect itself. Because if that weak muscle was a long muscle, it would run the risk of tearing. So that's a natural response to a weakness. Anyway, check this out. Look how flexible it is. His chest is almost touching the floor. Phenomenal. Phenomenal. So anyway, that's what I just wanted to share with you guys in this video. I thought it was interesting that guy came up to me and said, "Guy, he thought I was advanced." And in my mind, I'm thinking, Klokov is advanced, man. I'm just a scrubber guy in the gym trying to improve. So anyway, if you're struggling with your squat, if you're leaning over a whole bunch, if this is the other thing, if you're squatting and all you're feeling is your glutes growing, that's because you're basically only doing hip extension in the squat. You're just leaning over too far. If your quads are not growing, that's because you're probably not upright enough in the squat. But anyway, I hope this helps. I hope you get motivated to stretch every day. Stretch as much as you train. You don't have to spend all that time in the gym. Like I sit on the floor and I'm always stretching when I'm watching TV with the family, with the kids. I'm always stretching. Now I've taken up stretching quite late in my life. I'm 30 years old and I'm very I'm inflexible. But you can make improvements whoever you are. We're not all gonna be Olympic weightlifters. We're not gonna be on the stage doing wonderful things. But I think it's pretty cool when you make an improvement and you see it. It's a motivating thing. So anyway, get your stretch on. You'll be more upright in the squat. I hope this helps, guys. All right, catch you in the next one.